Today, we begin our study of conceptual metaphors. First, we delve into conceptual metaphor theory, investigating how linguistic metaphors operate, how source and target domains interact, and how metaphorical mappings influence meaning. We then will review concepts related to image schemas, concentrating on the verticality and linearity schemas, which shape many of our cognitive and perceptual experiences. Finally, we apply these concepts to film musics that examining how metaphorical mappings, both structural like Mickey Mousing and semantic, enhance narrative and emotional engagement. Before we dive into these ideas, I want to highlight that Juan Chata explores them in greater depth with additional examples in his book, Film Music, Cognition to Interpretation. His research does not just explore how sound and image interact, it also unpacks what happens inside our brains when we process these connections. If you have ever wondered why a musical cue can instantly transport you to a time, place, or emotional state, his book offers some eye-opening insights into the cognitive and perceptual machinery behind it. The concepts of image schema and conceptual metaphor are intricately connected within the realm of embodied cognition, as both highlight how our bodily experiences influence abstract thinking. In this timeline, we examine their progression alongside major theories in semiotics, cognitive psychology, neuropsychology, and neuroscience, evolving from a heritage that encompasses Gestalt principles, categorization theories, and affordances. These frameworks, developed by Johnson 1987 and Lakoff and Johnson 1980, facilitate an understanding of how metaphorical thinking and spatial cognition support meaning-making processes, including those found in music and film. This figure situates schemas and metaphors within a broader model of meaning construction, mapping out the various ways we derive meaning from film music, ranging from immediate sensory perception to deeper analytical interpretation. As we have discussed, these mechanisms do not operate in isolation. They intertwine and reinforce one another in shaping our understanding. However, for clarity, we will examine each of them individually. A metaphor is an explicit or implicit comparison that is literally false. For example, my car is a lemon is a metaphor, as my car is not literally a lemon. In contrast, my car is a Honda is a categorization, not a metaphor. Understanding metaphors is not just about noticing a clever comparison, it is about recognizing what makes the two things similar in a meaningful way. When we say, her brain is a computer, we are not claiming she has a motherboard in her skull. Instead, we are picking out features like accuracy, speed, and storage capacity and mapping them from one domain, computers, onto another, brains. In other words, metaphors work by highlighting relevant similarities and allowing us to perceive one thing in terms of another. Context matters a lot. The phrase, John is a tiger, can imply completely different meanings depending on the circumstances. If John just tackled 3 people and sprinted down the field with relentless aggression, we might interpret it as a metaphor for his wild, ferocious energy. But if John is wearing an LSU jersey, then suddenly it is not a metaphor at all. He is literally a tiger, meaning a member of the team. This highlights an important aspect of metaphors. They rely on interpretation. The same words can change meaning based on context, and our brains naturally pick up on the cues to determine whether something is figurative or literal. Lakoff and Johnson contend that metaphorical thinking is not merely a creative flourish, it is essential to how we comprehend the world. Rather than viewing metaphors as standalone figures of speech, they suggest categorizing them into larger conceptual metaphors that influence thought on a profound level. Take these examples. She has a fertile imagination. Mathematics has many branches, and his ideas have finally come to fruition. On the surface, they are simply different ways of talking about ideas, yet they all fit into a larger pattern. Ideas are plants. This conceptual metaphor allows us to view ideas as living entities. They can grow, branch out, bear fruit, or wither away. The structure, life cycle, and organic nature of plants provide us a means to comprehend abstract thought. So when we say an idea is flourishing or rooted in tradition, we are not simply being poetic. We are engaging with a deeply ingrained cognitive framework that helps us process abstract concepts in familiar, embodied ways. Or take these examples. I have invested a lot of time in her. You are wasting my time. This gadget will save you hours. How do you spend your time these days? At first glance, these may appear to be ordinary expressions, but they all have a deeper structure. They treat time as if it were money. This is what Lakoff and Johnson call a conceptual metaphor. Time is money. Because money is something we measure, save, spend, and waste, this metaphor influences our perception of time in the same way. We refer to budgeting time or running out of time because we view time as a limited, valuable resource, something we can invest wisely or waste carelessly. Importantly, this is not merely a linguistic quirk. It genuinely affects how we experience and prioritize time in our daily lives. Grouping individual metaphors into broader conceptual categories helps reveal their underlying structure. In this case, we can express them as A is B, where A, the target domain, is understood in terms of B, the source domain. But there is more to it. This structure is not merely a two-way comparison. The mapping flows in one direction from B to A. Going back to the ideas are plants conceptual metaphor, this means we do not just randomly associate plants with ideas. Instead, we leverage our understanding of how plants grow, branch out, and bear fruit to make sense of abstract concepts like knowledge, and creativity. So when we say an idea is growing roots or bearing fruit, we are not speaking from thin air. We are subconsciously using a structured, directional metaphor that helps us understand something intangible by relating it to something deeply familiar. Conceptual metaphors do not simply map one domain onto another. They can originate from multiple sources, each highlighting a distinct aspect of a single target. Take happiness. We can conceptualize it as light, as in, she was shining with joy, which emphasizes the radiance and energy that happiness appears to emit. But we can also think of happiness as a fluid in a container, like in, she overflowed with joy, which emphasizes its intensity and how it can exceed our control. Both metaphors depict happiness, yet they frame it differently, influencing how we discuss and even feel happiness itself. And vice versa. Often, the same source domain can help us understand multiple targets. Take the metaphor of buildings. We use it to describe theories, as in his theories have a strong foundation, where the focus is on structural integrity and logical support. But we also use it to talk about relationships, like in we are building our future together, which emphasizes gradual construction and shared effort. In both instances, the buildings metaphor aids in understanding abstract concepts by providing them with structure, stability, and progression, whether we are talking about knowledge or human connections. This brings us to the notions of directionality in metaphorical mappings. Cognition 2002 argues that metaphor mappings are typically unidirectional due to differences in abstraction. We rely on our embodied concrete experiences to understand more abstract domains rather than the reverse. That is why we say time is money, but not money is time. Mark Johnson, 2007, builds on these ideas and proposes a vital feature that our brains process meaning through activations moving from sensory motor areas to higher cognitive functions. More from an empirical perspective, Rohr cites neurological studies where participants were presented with sentences like, I want to hand you an idea that at first may seem hard to grasp, but if you turn it over and over again in your head until you finally get a firm handle on it, it will feel completely right to you. While traditional models of language processing suggested that such sentences primarily engage Broca's and Wernicke's areas, responsible for speech production, syntactic processing, and language comprehension, these new studies indicate that semantic comprehension also activates the premotor cortex, particularly Brodmann Area 6, which is associated with motor planning and actions. This is firmly grounded in embodied cognition, asserting that sensorimotor cortices are essential for processing meaning in metaphorical expressions rooted in image schemas. This is where image schemas become essential. They serve as the foundation for metaphorical thinking, as they form the core of the motor sensory programs we develop. Schemas arise from our repeated interactions with the world and the consistencies we notice in those interactions. These schemas shape how we perceive movement, space, containment, force, and balance, serving as building blocks for metaphorical thought, especially for bodily-based conceptual metaphors like more is up and affection is warmth. In another session, we explored the container schema. Today, we will focus on the verticality and linearity schemas. The verticality schema establishes a continuum with a vertical orientation that structures our understanding of concepts such as height, power, and quantity. Like in the more is up conceptual metaphor, which includes linguistic metaphors like spirits are high, she is rising to power, prophets are soaring. And the related linearity schema, which establishes a continuum that lacks any inherent directional orientation, helps structure our understanding of progression, motion, and continuity in a more abstract, direction-neutral manner. Like in the affection armed conceptual metaphor, which includes linguistic expressions like, she gave him a warm welcome, their friendship has grown cold, his response was lukewarm. This becomes evident when we look at how we use metaphors to describe musical events. While some metaphors relate musical motion to spatial height, most organize music along a continuum without a fixed directional orientation, a defining characteristic of the linearity schema. For example, a rising clarinet melody soars above the accompaniment, uses the verticality schema to structure pitch, mapping higher frequencies as up and lower frequencies as down. The orchestra swells, growing from a whisper to a roar, follows a gradual increase in intensity, conceptualized as a continuum of expansion without the vertical orientation, so relying on the linearity schema. The music gradually loses momentum, coming to a standstill, maps tempo onto motion, a gradual deceleration along a temporal continuum rather than an upward or downward shift. The music gets thicker and thicker, describes textural growth as an incremental accumulation, emphasizing gradual transformation rather than spatial movement. The grinding chords slowly melt into a serene texture, conceptualizes harmonic resolution as a gradual shift from roughness to smoothness rather than spatial height. In music, while pitch is often mapped onto verticality, most other musical dimensions, such as loudness, speed, density, and harmonic stability, are more effectively understood through the linearity schema, where change unfolds along a continuum without any inherent spatial orientation. Before we move on to metaphors in film music, I want to highlight how Lakoff and Johnson expanded the study of metaphor beyond language, framing it as a conceptual and sociocultural phenomenon. Metaphors do not just exist in words. They arise from our perception, cognition, and culture, often integrating multiple sensory modalities. Consider this example: a high-heeled shoe and a chili pepper, each labeled as evoking either pleasure or pain. The juxtaposition forces us to engage in a metaphorical process. We recognize how these objects feel, look, or are culturally associated with physical and emotional experiences. Alternatively, consider the Leaning Tower of Pisa and a classical statue. Superimposing radically different labels compels us to engage in metaphorical thinking. The Tower of Pisa is physically leaning, an architectural flaw, yet in certain contexts it remains a perfect cultural symbol. The statue is missing an arm, which could render it imperfect in a literal sense, but we often perceive classical sculptures as representations of idealized beauty. In these cases of cross-modal metaphors, we map from the linguistic terms onto our interpretation of the images. Before we explore film music metaphors, I want to take a moment to address a caveat regarding directionality and asymmetry that pertains to cross-modal metaphors. What happens when the distinction between abstract and concrete is not so clear? As we will see, cross-modal metaphorical mappings are not confined to this abstract is concrete structure. Some scholars emphasize that when both domains are either concrete or abstract, directionality is not solely about abstraction. It involves which features are projected from one domain onto the other. According to Ortoni, metaphorical mappings depend on the prominence of features in the source domain that are not as clearly defined in the target domain. For instance, let us take a look at a case where both the source and target are seemingly concrete. Consider the metaphor, that surgeon is a butcher, versus that butcher is a surgeon. In the first case, we transfer the butcher's carelessness and brutality onto the surgeon. However, turning it around significantly alters the projected features. The butcher now acquires the surgeon's precision and skill. The two versions of the metaphor do not merely swap places. They generate fundamentally different meanings due to the directionality of the mapping. While many metaphors follow an abstract to concrete pathway, others rely on the order of the domains and the prominence of features within the source. We should keep this in mind when examining film music metaphors. At last, we delve into film music metaphors. The interplay of film and music often sparks metaphorical thinking. Utilizing the verticality and linearity schemas, we establish connections between the one-dimensional continua found in music, such as pitch, volume, and timbral density, and various cinematic domains, including the motion of objects on screen, shifts in narrative tension, or emotional arcs. For instance, the pitch frequency is motion in vertical space, conceptual metaphor, where increasing pitch frequency correlates with upward motion and decreasing pitch frequency with downward motion is pervasive in cartoons. Consider a scene from a Tom and Jerry cartoon. Jerry falls from a toy airplane, and the music reflects this motion with a descending chromatic figure. There is even a brief pause in the melody, perfectly timed with the moment a parachute, made from a brassiere, of course, opens mid-fall. This serves as a textbook example of Mickey Mousing, a technique where music is closely synchronized with on-screen actions, aligning physical movement with musical gestures. By matching pitch descent with a visual fall, the scene employs the linearity schema to reinforce meaning across sensory modalities. In this scene from Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, the music does not just trace a descending scale, it outlines a descending sequence, a repeating melodic pattern that shifts downward step by step. This musical gesture reinforces the overarching visual concept of falling, even though the character himself is anything but straightforward in his motion. He bounces erratically in multiple directions while spiraling down through a tornado toward the ground. What is interesting here is how the music captures the conceptual trajectory rather than the literal one. The descending sequence evokes the sensation of downward movement, helping us make sense of the chaos on screen through a more stable, linear musical metaphor. Though Mickey Mousing is often linked to cartoons, many composers have embraced the technique for live-action films. A notable example is King Kong, 1933, as well as the broader works of Max Steiner. In a climactic scene, Kong takes Anne to his mountaintop lair, high above a subterranean pool. Jack stealthily climbs toward the cave, pressing himself into rocky crevices. While Kong battles a giant bird, Jack frees Anne, and they begin rappelling down the inner wall of the cave on a vine. As they descend, the music echoes their movement with a descending musical gesture. However, when Kong notices and grabs the vine, pulling them back up, the music reverses direction, shifting to ascending gestures that correspond to their rising motion. Finally, Jack cuts the vine and they both plunge into the waters below. Once again, the music falls with them, returning to a descending motion. This sequence demonstrates how Mickey Mousing can extend beyond comedy to create dramatic embodied connections between movement and music, utilizing image schemas like verticality to enhance narrative action. In a scene from the Hindenburg, the music suggests motion that is not directly shown on screen, but is still vividly felt. As passengers board the Zeppelin, they take in the ship's elegance and start to explore. At their cabin windows, two men exchange farewell glances with their wives below. The camera lingers on their faces, on the crowd waving from the ground. However, instead of showing the ship taking off, the scene employs a different approach. The camera itself ascends, providing a subjective point of view as if we are seeing through the eyes of a passenger in the rising ship. At this moment, the music introduces intermittently rising pitch figures, culminating in a full statement of the Hindenburg theme as the Zeppelin soars into the night sky. We do not see anything physically rising, no character or object ascends, but the music fills in the gap. By drawing on the pitch and vertical space metaphor, the score maps rising pitch onto rising altitude. The result is a compelling illusion of lift, created not through special effects, but through an elegant musical metaphor.
Drop line. Up ship.
The main title sequence of Interview with the Vampire provides a haunting, almost disembodied perspective. From high above San Francisco, the camera glides as a hollow, open fifth resonates in the string's upper register. Below, Christmas lights begin to flicker across the Embarcadero Center, casting a soft glow over the moonless night. As we soar past the ferry building and gently descend onto Market Street, the score starts to evoke the Catholic hymn, Libera Me. The theme emerges in children's voices, high and ethereal, before gradually slipping into the string's lower register. This musical descent creates a kinetic metaphor, one that mirrors the unseen vampire's perspective as he descends upon the city. But more than just charting motion, the descending contour suggests a spiritual or theological fall, which establishes the tone for the film's broader themes of damnation, loss, and the tension between mortality and eternal life. Often, the verticality schema is complemented by the linearity schema, which is not limited to mappings of vertical movement onto the musical space. For instance, when supporting metaphorical correlations between musical parameters, such as pitch frequency and loudness, and the perceived size of characters or objects, low, loud musical figures represent large or imposing entities, while high, soft figures evoke smallness or delicacy. Jurassic Park provides a clear example of how these mappings contribute to character development. Early in the film, we enter the park's nursery where rows of dinosaur eggs rest beneath infrared lamps. One begins to crack. The score responds with gentle high-register figures, softly performed by Celesta and choir, underscoring the wonder and fragility of a tiny baby raptor hatching. Later, the now-grown raptors stalk Tim and Lex in the iconic kitchen scene. One raptor looms in the doorway while the other crashes through the space, knocking over pots and pans. The music responds with loud, low-register gestures performed by brass and timpani, amplifying the threat and evoking the sheer size and power of the predators. Throughout these scenes, the score draws on two metaphorical mappings grounded in the linearity schema. Pitch frequency is size, and loudness is size. Together, these mappings help the audience perceive the contrast in scale and reinforce the dramatic evolution of the raptors, from fragile newborns to terrifying fully grown hunters.
Come on. Come on, little one. Come on. Come on, little one. Come on. Come on, then. Come on, then. Very good. Push. Push. Very good.
God.
Push. Come on. Come on. Come on, then. There you are. There you are.
Timmy, what is it? It's a velociraptor.
However, the mappings of static parameters do not always align with the mappings of dynamic parameters. For example, while musical figures in the high register represent small objects, and those in the low register represent large objects, music representing dynamic transformations, whether growing or shrinking, exhibits the opposite tendencies. When characters or objects change in size, the music illustrating their growth ascends, while the music illustrating their shrinkage descends. In Alice in Wonderland, she tries to get through a tiny door, but her shoulders will not fit. Then, as if by magic, a small bottle labeled "Drink Me" appears. As she begins to shrink, her body folding into her oversized dress, the music reflects her transformation with downward string glissandi, reinforcing the visual contraction of her body.
It's only a dream.
In Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, we encounter the opposite type of transformation, expansion instead of contraction. Violet, ever the competitor, snatches up an experimental stick of gum that promises a full-course meal: tomato soup, roast beef, and blueberry pie. As she chews voraciously, Wonka cautions her to stop, but her mother encourages her. "Keep chewing, kiddo." Violet excitedly describes each course until she reaches dessert. At blueberry pie, her body begins to transform. Her skin turns violet and she rapidly inflates into a giant blueberry. In the soundtrack, the pitch of the music rises steadily, intensifying with her body's expansion. The ascending contour creates a powerful cross-modal mapping, where increasing pitch frequency reflects increasing physical size. This moment contrasts the transformation we witnessed in Alice in Wonderland, but the metaphorical structure is just as evident. While Violet's body balloon controllably, the music employs the pitchfrequency size metaphor, turning her grotesque expansion into a sonic event.
How is it, honey?
It's amazing. Tomato soup. I can feel it running down my throat.
Yeah, spit it out.
Young lady, I think you'd better...
It's changing. Roast beef with baked potato, crispy skin and butter.
Keep chewing, kiddo. My little girl's gonna be the first person in the world to have a chewing gum meal.
Yeah, I'm just a little concerned about
Blueberry pie and ice cream.
that part.
What's happening to her nose?
Turning blue.
Your whole nose has gone purple.
What do you mean?
Violet, you're turning violet. What's happening?
Well, I told you I hadn't quite got it right, because it goes a little funny when it gets to the dessert. It's the blueberry pie that does it. I'm terribly sorry.
Mother? What's happening to me?
welling up.
Like a blueberry.
I've tried it on like 20 Oompa Loompas, and each one ended up as a blueberry.
Let us shift our focus to another musical parameter, tempo. A scene from The Incredibles presents a striking example of how dynamic physical movement can be metaphorically mapped onto the musical timeline. As a bomb detonates on the elevated train tracks, a massive section is blown away. The non-diegetic action music kicks in, fast, intense, and full of rhythmic urgency, mirroring the runaway momentum of both the train and Mr. Incredible, who sprints to intercept it. He plants himself on the tracks. Just as he absorbs the train's force and miraculously slows it to a stop, the music's tempo decelerates, grinding to a halt along with the train. This moment relies on a tempo-based metaphor. Is kinetic energy. Here, musical time and physical energy merge into a unified experience of deceleration, impact, and relief.
Take this one home and make sure his mom knows what he's been doing.
We observe the same conceptual mapping at work, but in reverse, in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, where the tempo increases in parallel with escalating physical action. As the two warriors engage in combat, the drumming accelerates steadily, rising from around 112 to 186 BPM. As the rhythmic figures compress in time, the tempo reflects the fighter's growing aggression, propelling the scene toward its climax, a broken blade at one warrior's throat. This moment draws on the same conceptual metaphor as in The Incredibles. However, here, instead of slowing down, the music accelerates, pushing the visual energy forward through the linearity schema. In the last example, the music, along with camera movement, editing, and other visual cues, mirrors the escalating aggressiveness of the fighter's movements. However, this correspondence extends beyond merely mapping tempo to motion. It introduces a further, more abstract metaphor that reflects the character's emotional intensity and psychological states. What is particularly intriguing here is the reversal of the mapping direction. It no longer flows from the concrete visual domain to the abstract musical one. Rather, the increasing musical tempo, characterized by tight rhythmic compression and relentless drive, serves as the source domain, influencing how we perceive the character's emotional energy and inner tension. In the resulting conceptual metaphor, psychological tension is tempo, where slower tempi correlate with calm states and faster tempi with agitated states. The music assumes a more concrete role, projecting affective meaning back onto the visuals and narrative through the linearity schema. This marks a significant shift in metaphorical direction. Music is no longer the target of the mapping, passively influenced by what we see. Instead, it becomes the source domain, actively shaping our understanding of a character's internal experience or the emotional arc of a scene. This reversal arguably defines the boundary of the Mickey Mousing technique. While Mickey Mousing closely ties music to visible action, This type of metaphor immerses us in the semantic realm of film music, where music carries interpretive weight, commenting on psychological tension, signaling transformation, and guiding our feelings about what is happening on screen. Let us watch the scene again, this time keeping both of these conceptual metaphors in mind. Tempo is speed of physical movement, and psychological tension is tempo. Notice how the pacing of the music not only aligns with the characters' physical actions, but also encourages us to perceive shifts in their internal emotional states. This type of mapping can apply to any musical parameter, not just tempo. In the scene from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory that we examined earlier, we observed the pitch frequency is size metaphor at work. Violet's physical transformation into a giant blueberry is mirrored by the rising pitch in the music, mapping visual scale onto sonic space. However, there is more going on. As the pitch continues to rise, we also experience a second metaphor. Psychological tension is pitch frequency. The ascending register does not merely reflect Violet's growing size, it also evokes her increasing emotional pressure and lack of control. Once again, this is no longer just a matter of Mickey Mousing, where music mirrors surface-level movement. Here, the score enters the semantic realm, aiding us in interpreting Violet's inner state through metaphorical projection, transforming pitch into a cue for psychological unease.
Mother? What's happening to me?
She's swelling up.
Like a blueberry.
I've tried it on like 20 Oompa Loompas, and each one ended up as a blueberry.
By utilizing conceptual metaphors that establish semantic mappings, film music frequently serves as an invisible narrator, illuminating characters' moods, inner transformations, or narrative undercurrents that the visuals alone may not convey. One of the most common target domains for these metaphors is psychological tension, likely due to its greater narrational clarity compared to other more nuanced emotional states. Consider another scene from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. It is Charlie's birthday, and he is about to open his one treasured gift, a Wonka bar. The whole family gathers around, hopeful that this might be the bar containing the golden ticket. As Charlie unwraps the candy, the music swells. A crescendo in the strings mirrors his growing anticipation. Through the metaphor is loudness. The increasing volume reflects Charlie's rising emotional intensity. The rapping comes off with a snap, no ticket. In this instance, the music does not merely echo what is happening on screen. It delivers a sonic interpretation of emotional stakes, intensifying our connection to Charlie's disappointment by musically embodying the tension that builds and collapses in just a few seconds.
Maybe I should wait till morning.
Like hell. Pop. Altogether, we're 381 years old. We don't wait.
Now, Charlie, you mustn't feel too disappointed. You know, if you don't get the...
Whatever happens, you'll still have the candy.
Ah, well. That's that.
Film music often does not rely on a single metaphor to convey psychological tension. Instead, multiple musical parameters can act as source domains, projecting multi-layered conceptual metaphors that enhance the emotional and narrative resonance of a scene. In The Verdict, Frank views a final opportunity to redeem his struggling law career by taking on a medical malpractice case. The music in this scene subtly amplifies the psychological weight of the moment. It starts with a single pitch in the middle register and gradually incorporates all 12 chromatic tones, ascending into a higher register. This progression mirrors two overlapping metaphors. Psychological tension is dissonance, as harmonic density and instability escalate, and psychological tension is pitch frequency, as the rising register reflects Frank's increasing inner strain. Together, these musical gestures do more than mirror emotion. They create it, presenting an internal portrait of psychological unraveling that the dialogue and visuals alone only begin to hint at.
You think it's my fault? And I could have, but... Oh, God, I never should have taken it. There was no way I could win.
And it's over?
Yeah, it's over.
But I thought it wasn't over until the jury comes in.
Who'd you hear that from?
From you. You want me to tell you it's your fault. Okay, it probably is. But what are you going to do about it?
I wanted to talk to you. I thought maybe...
You maybe could get some sympathy. You came to the wrong place.
Well, what makes you so tough?
Maybe I'll tell you that later.
Is there gonna be later?
Not if you don't grow up. You're like a kid. You're coming in here like it's Sunday night. You want me to say you have a fever so you don't have to go back to school.
Why won't you understand?
I do understand, Frank. Believe me, I do. You say you're gonna lose. Is it my fault? Listen, the damn case doesn't start before tomorrow, and already it's over for you.
It is over.
You want to be a failure? Then do it someplace else. I can't invest in failure, Frank, anymore. I can't.
Excuse me.
In the opening scene of The Stepford Wives, the music captures the protagonist's psychological tension through a distinct yet equally powerful combination of conceptual metaphors. As Joanna begins to realize she is being fired, a sprawling vocal gesture sung by a choir emerges in the soundtrack. Though brief, this gesture feels emotionally expansive, portraying her rising panic and disbelief. What makes it so effective is the intertwining of two metaphorical mappings. Psychological tension is loudness, as the volume of the choir intensifies, and psychological tension is pitch frequency as the gesture climbs in register. Together, the rising pitch and increasing volume amplify one another, reinforcing Joanna's inner turmoil and drawing the viewer into her subjective experience.
We have shareholders. We can't let you sink the network. But we wish you only the best.
The potential for combining various musical parameters to convey psychological tension is vast, and in Soundless, we experience a striking example of this expressive layering. Victor is a meticulous hitman, renowned for carrying out executions in complete silence. As he peers through the scope of his rifle, locking onto his target through a nearby window, the camera lingers on his stillness and unwavering focus. The visuals remain static, emphasizing Victor's intense concentration. However, beneath this visual stillness, the underscoring becomes charged with anxiety, not Victor's, but that of the security personnel scrambling in the background to intervene. The score activates multiple linear musical parameters. Volume increases, pitch frequency rises, dissonance intensifies, and timbral density thickens. Together, these parallel increases reinforce a concomitant metaphorical structure, mapping psychological tension through several interlocking conceptual metaphors. This multidimensional musical cue enables us to feel the urgency and fear that remains unspoken and largely unseen.
Меня нужно еще раз в бутике.
Кончи за блядь!
Встретиться в гараже. Пока.
Irgendwas stimmt mit ihm nicht.
Er hat das Fenster aufgemacht.
Der Typ ist völlig fertig. Er sucht irgendwas.
Na, was habe ich ihm gesagt? Da kommt keiner durch. Nicht mal eine Maus.
Jetzt hat er es gefunden. Sieht aus wie ein Abfallspray.
Ich glaube, er hat einen Anfall. Er muss sofort aus dem Zimmer raus. Deckung! Sofort in Deckung!
Metaphorical mappings between music and film extend far beyond mere depictions of individual psychological tension. By tapping into our innate tendencies for musical empathy, film scores can help create an aura of collective emotion and ideological unity. In Avatar, humanity has colonized the moon Pandora, seeking to exploit its resources at the expense of the indigenous Na'vi, who coexist in deep harmony with nature. Jake Sully, a former Marine, is sent to infiltrate the Na'vi, but eventually shifts his allegiance as he falls in love and begins to identify with their values. In a crucial ceremony scene, Jake addresses the tribe. His tone starts out quiet and subdued. The Sky People have sent a message that they can take whatever they want, and no one can stop them. But as his voice swells with conviction, he declares, "We will send them a message." Finally, with a powerful cry, "Fly now with me, brothers and sisters," he urges them to rise up in defense of their land. The entire tribe roars in response, their voices echoing through the forest. The music traces the arc of this speech, beginning with a low, restrained melody in the cello and gradually building, adding instruments, thickening in texture, and culminating in energetic percussion and a full choir. Here, metaphorical mappings operate on a collective and ideological level. In-group cohesion is instrumental density, and agitation is volume. As the music grows denser and louder, it mirrors Jake's rhetorical progression and amplifies the emotional atmosphere, inviting us to empathize with the tribe through musical contagion and subvocal resonance. The music becomes a force of solidarity, mobilizing not only the Na'vi, but also the audience's own effective alignment with their cause.
The Sky People have sent us a message. That they can take whatever they want. And no one can stop them. But we will send them a message. You ride out as fast as the wind can carry you. You tell the other clans to come. You tell them Tarak Makto calls to them. And you fly now. With me. My brothers. Sisters. And we will show the Sky People that they cannot take whatever they want. And that this is our land.
Metaphorical mappings in film music extend beyond individual scenes. They can span the entirety of a film, creating long-range conceptual metaphors that help unify the narrative arc. In the conversation, music acts as a long-range metaphorical thread that shapes our understanding of the protagonist, Harry Call, a surveillance expert who spends his days listening in on the private lives of others. As Harry's psychological boundaries begin to erode, the film's non-diegetic piano score opens a window into his internal world. Here, the music unfolds through the conceptual metaphor, Psychological tension is timbral distortion, enabled by the linearity schema shared across both domains. As Harry's psychological state shifts, so does the clarity of the piano's timbre. In the early part of the film, following a successful surveillance job, the main theme is rendered clearly and smoothly, performed on a clean, undistorted piano. But as Harry starts to suspect that he may have unknowingly recorded evidence of a murder, and as the threat of involvement looms, the piano timbre becomes increasingly distorted, reflecting his growing anxiety.
I am afraid of murder.
By the film's climax, when Harry finds out that his own apartment has been bugged, the distortion reaches its peak, the piano sound now warped and unsettling, serving as a sonic reflection of his unraveling. Toward the end of the film, he realizes that someone is recording him. Infuriated, he searches for the recording device. Once again, the distorted piano timbre indicates his nervous tension, while the ostinato reflects his obsession with finding the recording device. But then, in a moment of quiet resignation, the distortion suddenly stops, returning to the undistorted piano sound, embodying the weight of a peaceful surrender. That is all for today. Thank you so much for listening. If this talk piqued your interest, you will find a much deeper exploration of these ideas in Juan Chata's book, Film Music, Cognition to Interpretation, along with a companion YouTube channel that delves into many of the examples we covered today. I hope you will check them out.